Greetings and welcome back to room 303. We are engaged in a conversation with Gibran's The Prophet. And as we look at this title, at this text, we now come to our third lecture that we are working with. We're going to hear his passage on love. Many have called this a prose poem, an attempt to maybe try to explain the true nature of love. In some regards, you could make the argument that we're back to Plato's Symposium. Many of you will argue that this sounds very similar to religious texts that seek to try to explain the key elements of love. We can obviously think of 1 Corinthians 13, or for example, 1 John 4, where the attempt is to talk about love. Now, the next four poems that we'll be dealing with will in some ways be read as a unit: love, marriage, children, and giving, all having to do with, of course, relationships and the like. Now, I'm working from some assumptions, namely, you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net down that left-hand side where you'll find our playlist. I've given a set of introductory comments I hope that you've already been exposed to, and we just finished with the coming of the ship, that kind of framing mechanism that Gibran will use to set up the now passages that we'll be looking at, these prose poems that we'll be looking at. You'll remember, I'm hopeful, you'll remember in the coming of the ships that the people we are told loved, but it was speechless and veiled. It's as if now we're going to have the prophet to present words for something that is actually, can we say it, translinguistic. And of course, in many ways, the basic premise of the prophet, the text, is really an evaluation of life and, of course, love. What is it that makes life of any meaning at all? Of course, it will be love. Here, we're going to see love as kind of representing four things: some kind of winged creature or a bird, a gardener, a reaper, a baker. All of these are going to somehow try to talk about how transformative love can be. And we're also going to point out that Gibran himself had a very close pal. Some called her a lover, Mary Haskell. And maybe she's the prototype for the Al-Timra character that we will meet, who is always going to be asking these questions in many of these poems. Let's turn now to the poem itself and enjoy the reading. And again, my assumption is that maybe you've already read this on your own, annotated on your own, and now you're coming to us to try to help explicate, if we can, to clarify. Then said Al-Timra, "Speak to us of love." And he raised his head, and he looked upon the people, and there fell a stillness upon them. I love the use of the word stillness. That is to say, if you really want to know about topics such as this, there must be a willingness to be still, to maybe listen with both head and with heart, yes? And with a great voice he said, "When love beckons to you, follow it. Though his ways are hard and steep, and when his wings enfold you, yield to him, though the sword hidden among his pinions may wound you." Now, what are we going to say right away? Well, love isn't easy. And I think this is one of the profound insights here that we, first of all, will make. There is a fundamental distinction between love and lust. We're here obviously thinking about a text like Shakespeare's Sonnet 116, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments." We've given full comments at LearnStrong.net. The goal here is to understand the complexity of love, that in fact it is difficult, hard, and steep. It isn't easy. And then notice this imagery of the bird. When his wings enfold you, yield to him, though the sword hidden among his pinions may wound you. You're going to get this word "may" here several times in this passage. It's possible, in other words, that exposing yourself to the power of love, to become vulnerable to the power of love, will in fact mean that there will be some pain, some wounding. And when he, love, speaks to you, believe in him. Obviously this is faith. Though his voice may shatter your dreams as the north wind lays waste the garden. We love the similes of the prophet, the passages in the prophet. Notice here, it may be the case that the voice of love will destroy dreams in the same way that sometimes a wind will destroy a garden. 4, even as love crowns you, so shall he crucify you. And again, so many of the lines of this precious text are so quotable, and certainly this is one of them. Love will certainly crown you, but it will also at times crucify you. And no question, the moment that the word crucify gets used here, we cannot help but think of those in the history of the world who received crucifixion and were not guilty of any crime. We obviously think of Christ in that regards. Even as he is for your growth, so he is for your pruning. So here we go. These are the two dimensions. You might think about the yin-yang symbol here. There's two sides, growth as well as pruning. Love is about both of those things. And if you'll think about it, this is what makes great students. They have a love of learning and seeking, as we quoted from Tennyson's Ulysses, to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. But there's always going to be, with this growth, the process of pruning. Go back to our comments on Francis Bacon's Of Studies and the way he talks about great learning always involves some kind of pruning of one's abilities. Even as he, love, ascends, we're back to this idea of the wings, to your height and caresses your tenderest branches, again we're back to trees, that quiver in the sun, so shall he descend to your roots and shake them in their clinging to the earth. In other words, there is the positive aspects of love, but there's also the profound, painful, negative aspects of love. You must be willing to embrace both. And then back to another powerful simile. Like sheaves of corn, he, love, gathers you unto himself. I want you to pay attention to not only the similes, but also to his verbs here. Notice gathering. And then a number of verbs here. He threshes you to make you naked, as in vulnerable. He sifts you to free you from your husks. It's a wonderful image that love is this process of reducing the superfluous qualities to get you to true freedom. He grinds you to whiteness. There's a bit more of a difficult kind of verb. He kneads you. Think about this, K-N-E-A-D-S, needs you as in making bread, a baker, you until you are pliant. And then he assigns you to his sacred fire. We're going to see fire as one of the primary imagery symbols in all of the prophet, that you may become sacred bread for God's sacred feast. In other words, love is the process of learning to go through both the joys as well as the pains of life. All these things shall love do unto you, that you may know the secrets of your heart. The word secret is useful all the way through this, all the way through all these poems. And in that knowledge, become a fragment of life's heart. In other words, we're back to that imagery. We're all a drop of water in the large ocean. Here, notice, love somehow binds us to the very life that we live. And there's a certain kind of secret element to how it all happens. But, he says now, if in your fear you would seek only love's peace and love's pleasure, then it's better for you that you cover your nakedness and pass out of love's threshing floor into the seasonless world, where you shall laugh, but not all of your laughter, and weep, but not all of your tears. Well, what's his argument here? Well, most people, what is it that Thoreau says in Walden? The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Here, you could hear the argument that's being made that most people live only half-lived lives. And the reason is because they never fully expose themselves to the power of love. So they laugh, but they're not truly laughing. We think here, of course, of the observation that Shelley will make into a skylark, and we commented on this at learnstrong.net. Look at somebody laughing really hard, and the reason they're laughing so hard is not that they're happy, but rather, Shelley suggests, they're sad. And the reason they're sad is because they know that this laughter, this joy must sooner or later end. We've commented, if you're happy and you know it, something's wrong. Love, true love for Gibran, will be this ability to see all of the prism of life. Yes, the joy, but also the pain and also the sorrow. And if you don't have this in your life, you're not really going to understand laughter. And not only are you not only going to understand laughter, but you're not going to understand tears either, weeping, sadness. Love, now this will sound very similar to something like 1 Corinthians 13, that famous passage in the Christian New Testament on love. Love gives not but itself, and takes not but from itself. Love possesses not, nor would it be possessed. For love is sufficient unto love. This line that sometimes became very popular in songs, "All you need is love," is of course manifest in an idea like this. Now, what's often misunderstood is what really we mean by love. We're not talking about lust. We're not talking about just the idea of trying to possess something to possess it. But rather, love is this process that will always lead us back to freedom. And if that's not the case, then something is not sufficient. He uses that word. When you love, you should not say, "God is in my heart," but rather, "I am in the heart of God." And think not you can direct the course of love. For love, if it finds you worthy, directs your course. Now, Gibran is, of course, playing with a very old game. St. Augustine pointed this out, of course, that there's two different, often views represented of deity or God in the religious corpus. To argue that to suggest that God loves you is a word picture that's easily accessible, assuming, of course, that you have had people in your life who have shown you tremendous love and comfort, right? But to say that God is love, which is the argument that's being made here, 1 John 4:8, for those of you who know the New Testament, God is love. Well, give me a word picture for that. Help me to understand. And this is the argument that he's making here. This is this transpersonal view of deity and, of course, of love itself. This idea as well that you can't force love. You can't direct the course of love. You must be open to the way in which love will lead you. This, of course, is back to that idea of vulnerability. Love, now, to finish, has no other desire but to fulfill itself. But if you love and must needs have desires, let these be your desires. And then notice again all the verbs. To melt and be like a running brook that sings its melody to the night. Beautiful poetry, obviously. To know the pain of too much tenderness. It's a profound insight. To be wounded by your own understanding of love. And to bleed willingly and joyfully. To wake at dawn with a winged heart and give thanks for another day of loving. To rest at the noon hour and meditate love's ecstasy. To return home at eventide with gratitude. And then to sleep with a prayer for the beloved in your heart and a song of praise upon your lips. Notice the idea of melting, releasing, and of course to become that running brook that will sing melody to the night. The pain of too much tenderness. If you truly feel the heart of the world, you will experience not just the joy but the pain of the world. And he says, you got to experience both, guys. It's necessary. To be wounded by your own understanding of love. That is to say, it's going to at times cause you pain. To recognize oneself in all being and all being in oneself, as we learn in the Upanishadic text in the Bhagavad Gita, is to open oneself up to the pain of the world, and in the process of so doing, to bleed willingly and joyfully. In other words, to try to embrace all of the different facets of the world is an element of love. And then finally, notice to wake at dawn, and again, the winged heart, that idea of flight, and give thanks for another day of loving, to rest at noonday. So notice we move through the entire day from morning to noon to evening, and meditate love's ecstasy, to return home at eventide with gratitude. And I think this is one of the central ideas of the text that we call the prophet. It is this idea of gratitude, to be thankful, to be gracious, to know that the life that you get to live is so remarkable and therefore to have gratitude. And then finally in the evening to sleep with a prayer for the beloved, a song of praise upon your lips. Where does joy come from? Well, it grows out of a recognition that love requires both sides. Love requires both sides. That is to say, there is no higher form than love, because love is the creative force. Hate will never create, right? It's always going to be love. Well, let's jump now to 2a. What's the primary messages that you're going to take away here? Maybe, for example, there is no greater force than love. That is to say, his identification of love with God. At 2b, I love the verbs in this and the similes, of course, but just go back and again, read again and pay attention to the verbs. At 3a, well, we mentioned passages from the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13, 1 John 4:8, God is love. Think about all the different types of ways love gets treated in the classical tradition. I'm just thinking now about Romeo's musings on love in Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, when he talks about the paradoxical nature of love. You can go back and find that at learnstrong.net if you want to run that to ground. What for you are your favorite titles that comment on love? I mean, I mentioned Sonnet 116, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. What's he say about that? Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. It's an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It's the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Right? Finally, at 3b, what are your thoughts about this view of love? Is it true that one of the aspects of true love is to feel pain? That seems kind of counterintuitive. We like to think, of course, from the texts we enjoy the most, that love provides great joy. But often we don't want to think about the great sorrow, the great pain, the weeping, as he will talk about it. And what about this idea to love without desire of possession? Do you think that's possible, and how do you understand it? I hope that a passage like this will send you on a nice long walk, or maybe a swing to the park. Thank you.